the best guns. A tale of the war. Bad moons on the road to Armageddon. Orcs is never beaten, but your mates can always be losing harder. Bad Moon proverb, invented roughly 5 minutes before this story starts. Part 1. The Bet. The cruiser Gutripa fell out of the warp-trailing fire, spores, and the distinct smell of an argument that had started 3 systems ago, and was only now reaching its proper volume. The argument lived on the gun deck, in a hall the size of a small hive chapel, which Big Mek Waaagh the Rig had plated in gold, because he could afford to, and, more importantly, because the other mechs couldn't. 5 of the richest, loudest, most dangerous Big Meks in the whole Bad Moon contingent of the Waaagh sat around a table made from the hatch of a looted Hume tank, and on that table sat a mountain of teeth so big it had its own foothills. "What I'm saying," said Waaagh, leaning back so the light caught every one of his gold-capped fangs, "is that there's 4 kinds of mech in this room. There's slow mechs, there's blind mechs, there's mechs what can't hit nothing unless it's flying, which nothing ever is, and then there's me." "That's 3 kinds," said Grabnut Skyfisher, who was cleaning the lens of his targeting monocle with a rag that made it dirtier. "The 4th kind is the kind what interrupts," said Waaagh. Waagh's pride and glory stood in the launch bay below their feet. A Big Mek Dakka rig, a walking gun platform on 6 piston legs, plated in gold, hung with glyphs, its rotating blitz cannon polished to a shine you could check your teeth in. Fast, shooty, rockets for the hard stuff, a custom force field for the rude stuff. Waaagh rode inside it like a very violent king in a very violent palace, and he had never once stopped talking about it. "A rig," rumbled Zogdrag Clawfist from the end of the table. Zogdrag was the biggest of the 5, which he considered the end of most arguments, and he said the word rig the way another orc might say squig droppings. "Little legs, little gun what spins. Cute, that is. The krump crucia don't spin. The krump crucia arrives." The krump crucia was Zogdrag's Gorkanaut, and it was less a vehicle than a building with opinions. It stood taller than a Hume chapel, painted yellow and black in flames, because yellow made the Dakka bigger, and everyone knew it. And its left arm ended in a claw that could pick up a battle wagon and shake the boys out like the last squig in a bag. Its right arm was a Death Storm mega shooter, with more barrels than Zogdrag had fingers, which, after a lifetime of mechin, was 7. "It arrives," agreed Waaagh, "about a week after the fight's over." "The fight ain't over till the krump crucia arrives," said Zogdrag, with the calm of an orc who has head-butted his way out of better arguments. "That's what arrivin' means." "You're both wrong," said Grabnuts, screwing his monocle back in. "Guns is guns. Any grot can shoot a thing what's standin' on the ground. The ground does have to work, holdin' it still for you. But shootin' a thing what flies." He kissed the monocle. "That's art, that is. My traktor cannons don't just kill flying things. They fish 'em, yank 'em right out of the sky and smack 'em on the floor like Gork's own tantrum. I've pulled down Dakka jets, Hume flyers, a Pansy boat, and one time a thing what the grots still ain't identified." "Was it a cloud?" asked Waaagh. "I heard you shot a cloud. It was movin' suspicious." The fourth mech at the table had been drawing on a slate this whole time, which everyone found deeply unsettling. Fizzbang Tank Papa was the twitchiest of the five, yellow-armored, and hung all over with rockets like a very dangerous festival decoration. And he loved three things in this life: rockets, smasher guns, and, this was the unsettling part, plans. "While you lot was talkin'," said Fizzbang, holding up the slate, "I done the sums. Tanks, big walkers, armored Watsits, that's what wins fights, and that's what my rockets open up like ration tins. Boom, done next. It's efficient." There was a silence of the kind that follows a bad smell. "Efficient," said Zogdrag. "Sums," said Grabnuts. "You done a plan," said Waaagh, pointing at the slate like it might bite. "That's blood axe finkin', dat is. Next thing you know, you'll be wearing camo and talking to humies." Fizzbang went the dark green of true outrage. "It ain't a plan. It's a list of things what is gonna explode in order." "Order," said the fifth mech, and everyone shut up a bit, because Urgluk Ironclad rarely spoke, and when he did, it was through the speaker grill of the mega armor he never took off, which gave his voice the tone of Mork talking through a drain pipe. Urgluk was a mech who had looked at the entire glorious science of shooting and decided it was for gits who were scared of walking. He built mega armor, his own, and the suits of the 6 mega knobs who followed him everywhere like a landslide with loyalty issues, and he had strapped kill saws to all of it. "Guns run out," said Urgluk. "Rockets run out. Saw don't run out. Saw just gets warmer." He let that sit. Closer is better. Closest is best. Everything else is just noise what comes before the saw. "You're a mech," Waaagh howled. "You're supposed to love the noise. Gork and Mork, it's like listening to a squig say it don't like eatin'." And that was roughly when the headbutting started. It went around the table twice, in order of seniority, and settled precisely nothing, which everyone agreed was the sign of a quality debate. When the furniture stopped moving, Waaagh stood on the table, one boot in the teeth pile, blood running cheerfully down his face, and made history. "Right," he bellowed. "Enough gabbin'. We's Bad Moons. We got the flashest gear in the whole war, and we's about to take it to Armageddon, where the prophet himself is gonna be watchin'. So here's the bet. Next rock we pass what's got something killable on it, we drop. Each mech fights with his own toys and nothin' else. Most killy wins the pot." He kicked the Tooth Mountain, which avalanched majestically. And a title, "The Best Mech of the Waaagh, and first loot when we hits Armageddon." "Ooh, counts the kills," said Grabnuts, instantly suspicious, which for a bad moon was the resting state. "Nizzle!" roared Waaagh. A grot scrambled up onto the table, tripping over a slate bigger than he was. Nizzle the Tallygrot was the only creature aboard who could count past lots. The rumor was he could get to almost 20 before his nose bled. And he had survived 3 owners on the strength of it, which for a grot was a career.
"Countin' services, your shininesses,"
Nizzle squeaked, bowing in 5 directions.
"Fair and square and only slightly bribable."
Behind him, unnoticed by everyone important, another grot lingered in the doorway with an oil can and an expression of pure, patient scheming. Scabbit, head oiler of Waagh's rig crew, had heard every word, and somewhere behind his little red eyes, an idea was being born. It involved a truck. The vox horns crackled. The voice of Captain Gutsnark filled the hall, thick with the joy of a captain with good news. "Oh aye, listen up, you gits. Engines is coolin' at some humy mudball called Colossa. Lookout squig says there's spiky boys on it, de smelly sort, rotten flies and moanin'. Dey's buildin' somefin in the middle of a city, and they ain't been crumped yet." 5 Big Meks looked at each other across a mountain of teeth. "Well den," said Waaagh, gold fangs gleaming. "Race ya down." Part 2. The Drop. The landas fell through Colossa's clouds like a bag of anvils with ambitions, and the clouds were the color of a wound gone wrong. From the ramp of the lead landa, the city came up at them gray and swollen. Whole streets had burst like blisters. The river had stopped being water some time ago, and hadn't decided what to be next. And in the middle of it all, in the great market square where humies had once sold each other vegetables and lies, the enemy was building. It was a bell the size of a deaf dread, hung in a scaffold of black iron and yellowed bone, and around it labored the spiky boys of the smelly sort, plague marines, fat and patient, their armor the green of things, found under other things. Every few minutes a great striker arm drew back, and the bell tolled, a sound like a fist through wet meat. When it tolled, the air rippled. Somewhere under the city, in cellars and crypts, the last humies of Colossa held their breath, felt the sound crawl in through their skin, and grew a little more like the ones outside. Not that the orcs knew that. What the orcs knew was that it was big, it was loud, and it belonged to someone else. 3 properties, which, combined, made it the most interesting object on the planet. The 5 forces came down in a rough ring around the square, and Fizzbang, to universal disgust, produced his slate. "Right, the city's a bowl, the square's the middle. Zogdrag walks up the main road, that's da anvil. Urgluk's da over anvil. I teleport him behind with the rockets, that's da hammer. Waaagh sweeps the flank. Grabnut sits on the big parkin' thing and watches the sky. And who made you war boss?" said Waaagh. "It ain't bossin', it's sequencin'." "Point of order," said Grabnuts, who had been staring upward for some time with his monocle. "Da sky." They looked up. The sky of Colossa was empty. Not mostly empty, not tactically empty. Empty like a bad moon's charity, empty like a grot's confession. Not a flyer, not a drone, not so much as an ambitious bird. The Vox channel discovered its purpose for the day. "Oh dear," said Waaagh, with the sincerity of a pain boy's waiting room. "Oh no. Grabnuts, mate. What's your guns for? Again? Say it slow." "Somefin always flies eventually," said Grabnuts with dignity. "Things what fly is things what fall. It's a waiting game." "The only thing flyin' down there is the smell," said Fizzbang. "I'll wait." Zogdreg's voice came over the channel like continental drift. "Enough gabbin'. Nizzle. Do rules." High above, safe in the landa with his slate, Nizzle cleared his throat importantly.
Rules of the bet, your shininesses. Each Meks kills gets tallied by me, fair and honest and watching from up here with the big-looking glass. What counts? Enemies crumped, shot, sawed, squashed, fished, or exploded by your own gear and no one else's. What don't count? Your own boys, your own gear, and I'm looking at no one in particular. Yourself.
Why's everyone looking at me? Said Zogdrag. Start the clock, bellowed Waaagh, and 5 armies fell on the city of Kalosa. Sergeant Dravask of the Weeping Vale had stood on 40 worlds and watched them all sicken, and he no longer remembered which of them he had been born on. It did not matter. Under the armor, he was mostly the grandfather's garden now, and gardens do not miss things. He heard the greenskins before the Auspex found them, engines, drums, and beneath it all that sound the young ones mistook for a war cry, and the old ones knew was worse. Laughter. Tens of thousands of tons of scrap iron and muscle were falling upon the carillon of rebirth, upon the patient work of months, and the enemy was laughing, the way children laugh on the way to a fair. Lord Gurax the Unhasting stood beneath the bell, hands folded upon his scythe, and did not turn. "Let them come," he said, in a voice like a tomb settling. "Everything comes to the garden in the end." Dravask racked his bolter, and the bell tolled on. Part 3. Everything Goes Wrong. Part 1. The first thing that went wrong for Zogdrag, which surprised him because he was inside the biggest thing on the planet. Dakka came up the Avenue of Tithes at its top speed, which was the speed of a glacier that had heard about revenge, and every step cracked the rockcrete and set the dead windows shivering. Zogdrag sat in its chest in a throne of pistons, claw-flexing. Mega Shooter spun up to a hungry whine, and ahead of him, at the far end of 2,000 paces of dead-straight boulevard, sat a tank. It was a fat thing, a Humy chassis gone rotten, its hull weeping, and its great gun crusted like an old wound. Glyphs of the fly were daubed on it in something Zogdrag chose not to think about. It saw him the moment he saw it. The Plague Reaper's cannon spoke, and half a second later, Dakka rang like a bell, and Zogdrag's teeth rattled in his head. "Oi," he said. It fired again. A slab of yellow armor the size of a truck bed spanged off into a hab block. "Oi!"
Zogdrag's found a friend,
reported Nizzle from on high. Zogdrag answered with the Death Storm Mega Shooter, all barrels, a torrent of Dakka that turned the boulevard into a hurricane of tracer and dust and shredded rockcrete. It was a gun built to delete infantry by the mob, and at 2,000 paces against a tank, it did exactly what a hurricane does to a rock. The Plague Reaper sat in the storm, streaming sparks, insulted precisely nowhere that mattered, and fired again. "Right," growled Zogdrag, and reached for the button. Every mech builds one. It sat under a brass guard on the arm of his throne, painted yellow, marked with the glyph of more. He thumped it once, and the Mega Shooter screamed up past its happy speed. Thumped it twice, and the rig of his rockets let go in a single glorious volley that peppered the boulevard, the hab blocks, and, in fairness, some of the tank. Thumped it a third time, and something deep into Krumpkrusha's right shoulder said bonk in a way no machine should. The ammo feed burst, half a hopper of shells cooked off inside the arm, and the mightiest walker on Colossa staggered sideways into a manufactorum with smoke pouring out of its own armpit.
Update!
Squeaked Nizzle.
The tank's on nil, and Zogdreg shot Zogdreg. That's minus a number I'm still working out.
It counts as a kill if I dies, roared Zogdreg, beating out the fire with his claw. It really don't, boss. Grabnut's Skyfisher had set his battery on the roof of a Hume parking hulk with a proper view of the square. 3 traktor cannons in a row, barrels tilted at the heavens, 6 grot crew per gun, and Grabnuts behind the middle one, in a folding chair he'd looted specifically for waiting in. He scanned the sky. The sky remained a masterpiece of nothing. "Anything," said Waaagh over the vox, sweetly. "Waitin'." "'Cause I thought I saw a flying thing," said Waaagh. "By the bell, little green job, buzzing about." Grabnuts was out of the chair with his monocle up before the sentence finished. "Where?" "Oh, no. Sorry, mate. That's a fly." The Vox channel achieved harmony for the first time that day. 5 signatures of laughter stacked up like a bad chord, and something in Grabnuts went ping in the place where mechs keep their patience. "Fine," he snarled, and kicked the elevation gear, and 3 traktor cannons swung down from the innocent sky to point at the square. "New target, the boss Spiky, the big one with the scythe, under the bell. I'm gonna fish him up and bounce him off this roof till he stops being smug, and then we'll see who laughs." "That ain't a flying thing," said Fizzbang. "It's about to be." The traktor cannon is not a precision instrument. It is a gun that argues with gravity, and at ground targets it argues loudly and wide. The first shot missed Lord Gurax by 3 paces, snagged a plague marine mid-stride, and introduced him to the sky he'd never asked to visit. He went up like a bad idea and came down 4 streets away, and Nizzle chalked a mark. The second shot missed by 2 paces. The Lord bent, unhurried, to lift a fallen censer at the perfect moment, and took the marine behind him through a chapel wall. The third missed by 1 pace, because Gurax stepped left with the weary economy of something that had been dodging worse than physics for 10,000 years, and the beam peeled his standard bearer off the ground and folded him around a lamp post. "You're whittling his mates down, lovely," offered Waaagh. "Another hour. He'll be too lonely to fight." "He's doing it on purpose," howled Grabnuts, whose monocle had begun to steam. Urgluk Ironclad could see the tank. It sat at the end of the boulevard, fat and rotten and perfect, trading fire with Zogdreg's smoldering walker, and every armored centimeter of it called out to Urgluk's killsaws like a love song. Heavy plate, slow, full of gubbins, the exact target Gork had put him on this planet to open. Between Urgluk and the tank stood approximately all of the poxwalkers on Colossa. They came out of the burst streets and the wet cellars in their hundreds, the city's old population with the city's new smile, moaning in a register that got into the bones, and they broke against the 7 meganobs like a tide against a very angry pier. Kill saws built to shear tank hulls swept through them and never even changed pitch. It was not fighting. It was gardening, if the garden fought back, and there was always more garden.
Status, Urgluk?
Chirped Nizzle. I can see the tank, said Urgluk through the drain pipe. Chunk. Squelch. It's right there. Chunk. This is the wrongest fight on they planet. Chunk. They ain't even got the decency to be armored. Chunk. Nizzle. How many's dat?
Lots, boss. Lots and lots. I run out of slate.
Den we's winnin', said Urgluk grimly, and waded on, and the tide closed over the meganobs, and did not stop coming. Fizzbang Tank Papa materialized in a flash of green lightning, exactly where his slate said he would, in a courtyard directly behind the enemy line, and had 1 entire second of pure vindication. "Day plan," he announced to his tank bustus as the teleport glow died. "As worked." The courtyard was full of Terminators. Blight Lords, 5 of them, hulks of pitted plate the size of Urgluk's boys, standing in a patient circle around what looked like a well of black water, and every one of them was turning toward the light show, and 2 of them carried flamers whose pilot lights burned a green that no honest fire had ever been. "Boss," said his second, Wurgit, "dey's lookin' right at us." "That's part of da." The courtyard turned into weather. The flamers spoke together, and the world went green and screaming, and Fizzbang's lads did the only sensible thing, which was to fire every rocket they owned at a range best described as conversational. The blast wave flattened orcs and Terminators alike. 1 Blight Lord came apart at the waist, with a sound like a wet drum. A second lost an arm, and didn't appear to notice, and Fizzbang exited the courtyard through a window that hadn't existed until he made it backwards, on fire, in 3 places, still firing.
"Update from Fizzbang!"
Nizzle sang out.
1 spiky Terminator crumped, and the plan is now running. How'd you put it, boss?
"In a different order," screamed Fizzbang from inside a hedge. And then there was Waaagh. It hurt the others to watch, and the worst part was that he narrated. The Dakka rig came around the flank of the square exactly as fast as its name promised, 6 golden legs drumming the rockcrete, blitz cannon spinning up with a sound like Mork clearing his throat, and it hit the plague marine line at the tanning vats and simply unzipped it. The blitz cannon was built for precisely this: heavy shells, absurd rate, infantry with delusions of durability. And Waaagh walked it up the line with the fat contentment of a mech whose entire day was going according to the brochure. "You see," he said over the open channel, weaving the rig sideways as a flamer gout blackened its rear legs. "The secret, excuse me a tick." The rocket rack thumped twice, and a Blight Lord who'd been stalking Fizzbang's hedge stopped existing above the knees. "The secret is balance. Speed and Dakka. Rockets and cannon. Everything, all at once. Done gold." The Plague Reaper, bored of failing to kill Zogdreg, swung its crusted cannon around and hit the Dakkarig square in the flank. The custom force field flared like a small sunrise. The rig skidded 4 legs sideways, righted itself, and kept shooting. The Vox went very quiet. "And that," said Waaagh, is why you buysed a good force field. Somewhere on a rooftop, a monocle cracked from pure envy. Part 4. Everything goes wrong. Part 2. Louder. The battle for Kolossa's market square now entered the phase that orc military scholars, both of them, call the proper bit, the point where every plan has died, every gun is doing someone else's job, and the whole engagement becomes a single, city-sized argument about whose fault it is. It began with the tank. The Plague Reaper had gone back to shelling Zogdrag on the reasonable grounds that he was the biggest thing available and getting closer. Da Krump was doing its arriving, smoking, listing, one arm dead, boulevard after boulevard falling behind it, at the pace of angry geology. And the tank's gunner, 7 centuries dead and still on duty, put a shell into the walker's chest, and another, and then, as Da Krump shouldered through a hab block rather than go around it, missed. The shell sailed past Zogdrag's smoldering shoulder, crossed the square, climbed 3 stories of parking hulk, and landed in the exact middle of Grabnuts's gun line. 2 traktor cannons went up in a fireball of brass and grot. Grabnuts was saved by the 3rd cannon, which fell on him, which was the sort of luck Bad Moons paid good teeth for. He surfaced from the wreckage hatless, smoking, one lens of his monocle gone, into a rooftop silence broken only by the patter of descending grots. "Dat," he announced to the Vox in a voice of wounded legal precision, "was aimed at Zogdrag. I'm claiming it as Zogdrag's fault. Nizzle, minus points to Zogdrag." "Dat ain't how points. Minus points." "How's the sky looking, Grabnuts?" asked Waaagh. "Still winning up there?" Fizzbang's day, meanwhile, had found somewhere new to go. He'd rallied his surviving tank busters, 9 lads, singed and delighted, and led them at a trot through the gut alleys behind the chapel, looking for something armored to justify the whole excursion. When they came around a corner and found it, a myphitic blight hauler, alone, 3-legged, and hunched like a beetle with regrets, grinding in circles by a collapsed archway. It had, as far as anyone could tell, taken a wrong turning some time ago, and was too proud to ask. "Tank!" bellowed 9 tank busters at once, with the joy of pilgrims sighting the temple. "Technically a walker," bellowed Fizzbang. "Open him up anyway." The thing about a blight hauler is that it is small and sad and lost, and it carries a multi-melta, and a multi-melta does not care about your feelings. The first beam turned Wurgit and the orc beside him into a memory. The second took 3 more as they scattered for cover that had already been rubble for a month. Fizzbang's rockets hammered back. 1, 2, hits, proper hits, armor cracking, ichor spraying. The little hauler staggering, listing, smoking. 1 good shot from done. And around the corner, horns blaring, glyphs flapping, came a truck. It was not a good truck. It was barely a truck-shaped truck. Its glyphs read, "Da Borrowed One," in fresh yellow paint. Its cargo bed was a riot of grots with looted sluggers, and at the wheel, goggles down, ears flat with speed, sat Scabbit. The truck hit the dying blight hauler at full revolutions, rammed it through the collapsed archway, and buried it under 4 stories of chapel. The dust settled. From the rubble, a small horrible leg twitched once, and was still. Grots boiled off the truck bed, cheering, and began stripping the wreck with the speed of professionals.
Update!
Nizzle's voice cracked with excitement.
Big spiky walka thing crumped. Kill goes to...
A pause, the sound of a grot realizing he was about to make an enemy either way.
To Scabbit's truck!
The noise Fizzbang made had no spelling. At the other end of the square, 7 meganobs finally ran out of poxwalkers. The tide had thinned, then broken, then become a carpet, and Urgluk stepped over the last of it and looked up, and there, 50 paces away, flank on, gloriously distracted, still lobbing shells at Zogdrag, sat the tank. His tank. The tank of his heart. "Boys," said Urgluk, and for the first time that day the drainpipe had music in it. Saws up. 7 suits of mega armor hit the Plague Reaper like a landslide keeping a promise. Kill saws that had spent an hour insulting themselves on meat met honest armor plate at last, and sang. They opened the sponsons. They opened the engine deck. Urgluk personally opened the turret like a ration tin, reached in, and concluded the crew's 7 centuries of service, and the whole rotten hulk sagged and gushed and died with a long, satisfied hiss, like a boil the size of history. "Tank," reported Urgluk, "crumped." "My tank," came Zogdreg's roar from up the boulevard, where the Krumkrusha stood draped in its own smoke. "I softened that tank for an hour. That's an assist. Nizzle."
You softened yourself, boss? I got it on the slate.
Zogdrag did not get to answer, because at that moment, the Blight Lords found him. The 3 survivors of Fizzbang's courtyard came out of the smoke at the Gorkanaut's feet, flamers washing green fire up its shins, and Zogdrag looked down from his throne of pistons at heavy infantry in claw range at last, and made a sound that the Krumkrusha's speakers translated as pure joy. The claw came down. What followed was brief, loud, and exactly what a Gorkanaut is for. When it was over, Zogdrag held up something flattened and dripping in the claw's grip, like a trophy or a suggestion. "Now the fight's over," he said, "'cause I arrived." "Dose was my Terminators," said Fizzbang weakly from his hedge. I had 'em sequenced." Which left the Bell and the Lord and Grabnuts. 1 cannon, half a crew, a monocle with 1 lens. Grabnuts laid his last tractor cannon on Lord Gurax the Unhasting personally, muttering the entire time in the language mechs speak to machinery that has embarrassed them, and fired everything the capacitors had left. The beam missed the Lord by half a pace. He had paused, unhurried, to bless a dying poxwalker, climbed past him, and hit the bell. The carillon of rebirth, months of patient labor, sanctified in 7 plagues, came off its scaffold like a tooth out of a grot. It hung in the tractor beam for 1 holy second, swung, tore free, and came down across the square in a single apocalyptic bong that flattened the scaffold. 30 poxwalkers, 2 plague marines, and every argument on the Vox at once. Lord Gurax stepped aside from the rolling rim of it with the weariness of a being for whom this, too, was somehow Tuesday. Silence of the ringing kind. "Nizzle," said Grabnuts at last. "Write down 1 bell."
Is a bell a fly thing, boss?
It was in the air when I killed it. And that was when Waaagh, who had spent the entire engagement being obscenely successful, decided the moment belonged to him. The Dakka strode into the middle of the square, over the cooling wreckage of everyone else's day, and stopped, golden in the sick light, and Waaagh popped the top hatch and climbed out onto the hull, where the Vox horns could get a good look at him. "Lads," he began, arms wide, "let's review. Zogdrag shot himself. Grabnuts got blown up by a shot what was aimed at someone else, which takes real talent. Fizzbang's kill got nicked by his own grots, and Urgluk spent a day moshing through Humy leftovers. Meanwhile, the rig, my rig, has killed more spiky boys than the rest of you put together, took a tank shell to the face, and has run out of nothing but targets. So I think we can all agree, ooh da best mech." Oh. The air behind him folded. There was no flash, no lightning, nothing so honest. The world simply grew 3 new shadows on the Dakkarig's hull, and the shadows had scythes, and the scythes were already moving. The Death Shroud do not announce themselves. That is the entire idea of the Death Shroud. 3 giants in ancient Terminator plate, hooded, silent, fly-blown, the Lord's own reapers, materialized out of the plague wind on top of the golden rig, and the man-reapers came around in flat, terrible arcs, and they went through the custom force field, and the rotating blitz cannon, and the rocket rack, and, with a sound, the Vox transmitted in perfect fidelity to every orc on Kalosa, through Waaagh. The Dakkarig's legs folded. The gold went down into the mud of the square, and the Death Shroud stood upon the wreck for a moment, made a small bow toward their lord, and folded away into nothing, work done, and the Vox was silent for 1 entire second. Then it erupted in the most sincere cheer of the entire day. "Did ya see that?" bellowed Zogdrag, claw raised in salute. "Right through the force field," howled Fizzbang, with tears of pure delight. "The good force field." "Mid-speech," wept Grabnuts. "They got him mid-speech. Oh, Gork's teeth, that's the funniest thing I ever. Nizzle, write the speech down, all of it, especially the last bit."
-1 Waaagh,
said Nizzle solemnly, and chalked it. Across the ruined square, the remaining servants of the Grandfather withdrew into the yellow fog, unhurried, bearing their fallen bell scaffold's relics, and no orc so much as shot at them, because everyone was laughing too hard. Sergeant Ravask walked backward from the square, bolter up, though nothing pursued. Behind him, the greenskins' laughter rolled off the ab blocks like a weather front. Months of work. The Carillon silenced, 3 brothers returned to the garden, and the enemy had not even noticed the shrine well beneath the courtyard, had blundered past a dozen blessings without once understanding what they broke. They had come for no reason, ruined everything, and left happy. They did not even want the world, he said. "No," said Lord Gurax, walking unhurried at his side. "They wanted the afternoon." The fog took them, and Kalosa went on dying quietly, the way it had before, only now without music. Part 5. The Moral. The Gutripa pulled away from Kalosa, trailing loot, spores, and 5 armies in a state of high celebration, and behind it, The planet shrank to a brown coin, and nobody looked back, because looking back was for things what was done, and Armageddon was ahead. In the meat bay off the gun deck, under a lumen made of looted candelabra, Doc Stabgit was doing the best work of his career. Wazik de Rig lay on the slab in 8 pieces, which Stabgit had arranged in roughly the traditional order, and was reattaching with wire, staples, enthusiasm, and a soldering iron. It was, the doc kept saying, a lovely challenge. The man-reaper cuts were so clean you could learn from them. He'd kept one of the smaller pieces aside in a jar, for reference, and possibly as a paperweight. Around the slab, the audience had assembled 4 Big Meks, 1 Tallygrot, and a wall of boys 3 deep, and the betting was fiercer than anything the battle had produced. 6 teeth says he wakes up before the arms is on, said Fizzbang. 10 says he don't wake at all, said Grabnuts, and another 5 says if he does, the first thing he says is about the rig. 20, rumbled Zogdrag, says the first thing he says is a lie about the rig. Nizzle chalked furiously. The odds board had grown its own scaffolding. On the slab, one newly attached hand twitched. An eye opened, found focus, and located, with unerring instinct, the audience. "The force field," croaked Wazik. "Worked perfect. They just went round it." "Pay up," roared Zogdrag, and the meat bay descended into the happy violence of settlement. It was another hour before anyone remembered the original bet, and Nizzle was made to stand on a crate and read the final tally. And the final tally started 3 fights before he even got to the numbers, because the numbers were these. Zogdrag had crumped 3 Terminators and 1 Zogdrag. Grabnuts had killed everything on the battlefield except the thing he was aiming at, plus 1 bell, category disputed. Fizzbang's finest kill was legally a Trux. Urgluk had the biggest score by weight and the wrongest score by type, having spent the day doing to a horde what a boy with a chopper could have done cheaper. And Wazik had won the whole day, right up until the day won him. "So, who's the best mech?" demanded Fizzbang. Nizzle consulted the slate and consulted it again, and did the bravest arithmetic of his small green life.
"Near as I can reckon it, your shininesses, nobody won."
He flinched, but the blow didn't come, so he finished it.
"But, and here's the thing, everybody lost, all 5 of you, every single one. Losers, the lot of you, begging your pardons."
There was a long silence while 5 Big Meks worked this through. "So what you're saying," said Zogdrag slowly, "is that I lost, but Fizzbang also lost." "And Grabnuts lost more'n me," said Fizzbang quickly. "And Wazik," said Grabnuts glowing, "lost the most. Got chopped into bits mid-brag in front of the old Waaagh. That's the biggest lose what's ever been lost." The meat bay went quiet with reverence. "Best bet we ever made," said Urgluk. And that was the truth of it, and every orc in the room felt it settle warm in his chest, the way only proper wisdom does. It don't matter that your gun met the wrong enemy, that your plan ran in the wrong order, that you shot yourself, or that the sky stayed empty all day. Winnin' is good, no one's sayin' different. But there's a joy what's deeper and greener, and older than winning, and it is standing next to your best mates and knowing, with total certainty, that every one of them did worse. The teeth pile went back in the pot, doubled for Armageddon. Scabbot and his truck crew were awarded, after some negotiation involving a headbutt, one genuine kill, and the salvage rights to a jar. Scabbot took the jar away and looked at it for a long time, and what he thought he kept to himself, because that is a grot's most dangerous weapon, and he was saving up. Far aft, in the dark of the observation blister, Zogdrag stood alone with a mug of fungus brew and looked at the stars, the way he did when his head got full. Somewhere out there, past Gork's grin, a world of ash and fire and endless enemies was waiting, and the prophet was calling, and Zogdrag could feel it even here, in the cold between the suns, a pull behind the eyes, a drumbeat under the deck plates, a promise that the scrap on Colossa was nothing, a warm-up, a knuckle crack before the real swing. Every orc on the ship could feel it. Waaagh was rising, and they were part of it, one yellow-painted tooth in a grin the size of the galaxy. Behind him, muffled through 6 bulkheads, he could hear Waaagh, stapled, wired, one arm still on backwards, already explaining to anyone who'd listen how, if you thought about it properly, he'd technically won. Zogdrag smiled, drained his mug, and went to go and headbutt him about it. Waaagh